Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word, and for today's video I'm going to be talking a little bit about Formula One's future and where the sport needs to go to keep itself relevant and popular and what the sport actually is. So F1 is about to start its negotiations for its future blueprint in terms of the engine formula. Basically, guys, we had this a few years ago and they decided on the hybrids from 2014. The teams need to know what they're doing, basically, and that's why they're putting all this together well in advance. But it's now raised big questions over where the sport is going to go. I honestly do not see the sport taking a step back from the hybrid engines. The FIA just don't do it anymore. They used to do it quite a bit, actually. In the 60s and 70s, it was something they changed all the time, but they just do not do that anymore. So a return to the V8s, or dare I dream, the V10s is probably never going to happen. In fact, it was actually Ross Brawn, of course, now of Liberty Media, who basically said that's not going to happen. Maybe they can come up with something around the current hybrid that will maybe make them louder, faster, better engines that'll get the fans involved a little more, engaged a little bit more rather than involved. But I think we're stuck with the hybrid power units now for certainly the next decade in Formula One. Of course, once the new formula comes in 2021, we're stuck with that for 8 to 10 years. So we could be looking at about 15 years that we're going to be stuck with the hybrid engines. I say stuck, I mean, you compare the 2017 hybrid engines to the 2014 and there's just no comparison. They're just so much louder, they're so much faster, and they're just more refined. So, you know, technology will continue to grow and the hybrid power units will get better, but the problem we've got now is Formula E. The fantastic UK government announced just recently they're going to ban new petrol and diesel cars from 2014, which has now pushed manufacturers to look at Formula E with a little bit more seriousness than maybe they would have in the past. We know already Porsche are going to go there, Mercedes have just announced they're doing it, Jaguar as well. So there are so many big manufacturers turning to Formula E because the future probably is electric on the roads. Whereas hybrid power, which is where Formula One is very outdated, or is certainly going to become outdated over the next couple of decades. So Formula One, it'll want to stay relevant, but does it need to stay relevant? That's the question. Formula E is doing all that. It's all electric. That's where the technology therefore probably belongs. And if the manufacturers are going that way, they're not going to turn their back on Formula E to come back to Formula One just because Formula One have gone, oh yeah, we can do electric too. That's not going to happen. So is it now that Formula One needs to decide, is it a sport? Is it entertainment? Is it about technology? It needs to make that call. For me, it's absolutely about entertainment. Yes, F1 has been at the forefront of the motor industry's technological advances over the last few decades, and it absolutely can be proud of that. There's no doubt about it, but Formula E has taken that, and for me that's definitely, like I said, where the technology belongs now, and that is where it will get developed. There is some talk of a merger between the two series. For me, though, that is something which, one, I don't ever see happening, and two, I never ever want to see happening in my lifetime. They are two very different forms of motorsport, but there is plenty of room for both of them. It's sports like DTM that are going to be concerned about their future rather than Formula One. The hybrid engines were brought in 2014, of course, because there's a lot made about F1's emissions and their contribution towards that. But I'm going to throw a stat at this, and I love a stat, and I've got my calculator out, done all my work, and I've given myself a massive headache, but this is something that really interests me when I worked it out. F1 cars are completely different to road cars. They're not driving around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there are only 20 of them. There are not billions of them, or whatever the figure is. In fact, this season, F1 cars will be running for no more than 140 hours over the course of 8 months. That's up to 7 hours every other weekend, whereas a road car, on average in the UK, one road car will drive for 346.3 hours over the same 8-month period of time. Now, I know F1 cars drink a lot more fuel. They're a lot more thirsty. They're going a lot quicker. Their mileage probably would be bumped up if you drew a direct comparison, but over an 8-month period, that's a big difference, and that's a lot more cars on the road as well. So I don't think using emissions as the reason that Formula One needs to go greener is the right main focus. That shouldn't be the main argument for hybrid engines. The only argument for hybrid engines for me is that it's great technology to develop for road cars to then put on those road cars and make them more green and more efficient. The problem is Formula E is doing a better job. Okay, Formula E can't finish a Grand Prix with one car or a race with one car. It will do eventually. They will definitely be able to go through a race without having to swap cars halfway through. That's the point of Formula E. They're developing that really well now, and it's definitely getting better, and that's the future of road cars. Hybrid isn't. So even that argument for hybrid engines probably gets thrown out the window now. I'm not anti-hybrid engines. I just don't think they're being used now for the right reasons. If they're sticking with them to help advance technology, that means F1's hybrid engines are going to be completely obsolete by 2030 at the absolute latest, I would say. So they need to be looking long-term rather than short-term. From a fan's perspective then, if the engines aren't going to change, which is one thing we'd love to see, I would love to see them go back to V10s, but it's never going to happen. If that's not going to change, how can the sport improve on track and off track? That is a big question, and that's a question that is probably asked every other weekend in Formula One. First things first, in terms of first things, things with an F there, guys, just for you. The first thing we need to look at, though, is getting rid of those overdeveloped front wings, and some aerodynamics would be a great start. If the cars can get closer, there's more wheel-to-wheel action and we see more overtaking. Personally, I'd take quieter engines as a trade-off, to be honest. I'd much rather see quieter engines and great racing than crap races and really, really loud engines, and I think a lot of us would agree on that. 2017 has already seen massive improvements in the racing. There's no denying that. The cars look quicker, they look more aggressive, there's more wheel-to-wheel stuff, but that's only when the cars can get wheel-to-wheel. The problem is, and the big concern, and the reason we need the change, is because the cars can't follow each other, and that is stopping a lot of overtaking. We could have seen Hungary, for example. How great a race would we have had if Lewis Hamilton could have got anywhere near those Ferraris? It would have been absolutely incredible, and it would be heralded as one of the greatest races of all time, probably on Sky Sports F1 for like an hour and a half to 2 hours. And yeah, but anyway, so that is the step they need to take. Improve the aerodynamics, take some away, make these cars less reliant on it so that cars can follow instantly. That is going to improve the show without any changes to anything else. Another massive area, as I said in my last video, is cost cutting. Now, first things first, I don't agree with cost capping. I think that's too far the other way. And at the end of the day, if a team earns the money, they should have every right to spend that money however they want. But last year, Ferrari spent £330 million and Sauber only, in quote marks, only spent £95 million. That is £105 million less than PSG paid for Neymar. There's a football fact for you guys. That is a rarity. So there's no wonder the gap in the field is just absolutely as big as it is. It's a chasm. It's a chasm. It's not a gap. It's absolutely massive, and it needs to change. One area they're looking at, as I said again in the last video, is standardized parts. I think that'd be great if they threw maybe suspension components, possibly even brakes into that bracket. That's going to reduce the cost. It's going to close the gap. It's going to allow the midfield to challenge the front runners. The biggest problem, though, in that respect is that Mercedes are never going to allow Williams or Force India to beat them in the championship, and Ferrari would never allow, let's say, Sauber to beat them in the championship. So the other thing we desperately need is a return of independent engine suppliers. Cosworth apparently are in talks of a return in 2021. That would be incredible. What a name that is in Formula One. F1 and Cosworth just almost go hand in hand. It would just be brilliant to see them back. And there's even talk that Mario Ilian wants to bring Ilmor engines back to the sport as well. If just one of those do return, that is instantly going to make a massive, massive difference to budgets and would increase competition throughout the grid massively. It would offer up more options and would also see teams given that freedom to challenge the big boys. And that is absolutely what we need in Formula One. And that is a massive step in the right direction. If that happens, I really want to see Cosworth back. It'd be great to see Ilmor back in the sport as well. As the old man in me rears his ugly head again, a return to the classic, more organic tracks would 100% get my vote. That would be fantastic, wouldn't it? To see tracks like Imola, Zandvoort, Watkins Glen back on the calendar would be absolutely brilliant. And it would definitely enhance the racing, because those tracks were, yes, designed for racing, but they weren't over-developed, over-refined. You know, Herman Tilke, fantastic circuit designer. 1999, he comes up with Malaysia. In fact, didn't he... maybe I'm wrong on this. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I seem to think he had something to do with the reprofiling of the old Österreich ring and ended up making the A1 ring in Austria in the 90s, I think. But his first main thing was a Malaysian Grand Prix, the Sepang International Circuit, which had its first race in 1999. It just became an instant fan and driver favourite. It was fantastic. The facilities were second to none. It was the future of Formula One. The problem was, and still is, that was all he knew. You know, since then, track layouts have become so similar and the teams have mastered the blueprint to the point where it's starting to lead to boring races and predictable overtaking. And that's only if the circuit allows for the overtaking. The Bud International Circuit, for example, was pretty poor for overtaking, even though the drivers absolutely loved it. So my fear of returning to those classic tracks is that the FIA and Tilke are going to get involved and they're going to end up with concrete runoff areas, too much reprofiling, too much, just making the tracks too sterile almost. And we don't want that. And, you know, when Mexico came back as a recent example, I was so excited, and so many were. The problem was I then got Tilke to look at improving, quote unquote, the track layout, and that kind of ruined certainly the S's between turn 7 and 13. They're just not the same track at all around there. And the Peraltada is not the old beast that it used to be. And okay, yeah, it's safer and that's important, but they're taking away from the classic parts of these tracks. And that's why I'm a little bit concerned about going back to old tracks, even though it would improve the racing. We don't want to see Imola, Zandvoort, Watkins Glen, etc. being too refined. We do not want that, because it will just mean we're going to end up with another Tilke designed track on an old site, basically, and that's not the idea. But away from the track, one massive area Liberty Media, of course, can focus on is fan engagement. Events like F1 Live London. I went to that. Fantastic fantastic event, great fun. Problem is, it needs polishing massively. The cars didn't get enough time down Whitehall. The drivers, although closer to fans because they're on stage, were still a million miles away. It felt that way. Great to see the cars. Fantastic to see some of the music acts there. But things like that are really important for the sport. Getting fans close to the drivers, though, is something that we all want, but it's something that I just don't see changing because you've got sponsors leaning so heavily on the driver's shoulders. And then with the security issues, we live in a sick world these days. The security issues that could raise just make it so unlikely to happen on any massive scale unless you're exceedingly rich and are walking around with a glass of Prosecco in your hand, and then you seem to be able to bump into anybody you want. But if you're just an average fan like I am, and like so many of you guys are, where you go to the races, you get yourself a general admission weekend ticket if you're lucky, you go watch it from the bank in the pee and rain, you'll never get anywhere near a driver, and that's what needs to change for me. Another area on the subject of weekends away, and I guess Silverstone, cheaper tickets at races would not go amiss either, but that will definitely be reliant on what Liberty Media can do in terms of negotiating with existing and new circuits that won't lead to annual price hikes without screwing themselves over. Liberty Media don't want to end up bankrupt and in financial trouble just to give us cheaper tickets and a great show, but at the same time, they need to do something to make the weekend cheaper, or at least make it more value for money. Silverstone could be the catalyst on the path to change. So many circuits are going to be watching Silverstone to see what kind of deal they can strike. Ultimately though, guys, whatever the relevant parties decide on F1's future, we can all agree on one thing, and that's that we just want to see the best drivers racing as hard as possible, flat out, constantly, and giving us, the fans, epic races, weekend in, weekend out. If they get that right, everything else will fall perfectly into place. But what do you guys think? Is there anything I've missed off the list that you think is massive priority for F1 to change? These are just my opinions and areas I'd like to see change. There are so many more, but I didn't want to make the video stupidly long. It's already going to be longer than probably any of my other videos are. But do let me know in the comments below, guys, what you think about F1's future and where it needs to go. That is it for today, though. I'll be back next week with another video, unless there's some big breaking news over the weekend. Then I will bring that to you. F1 2017, of course, next Friday, and let's not forget Belgium a week on Sunday. F1 is back, guys. It's been far too long. I can't wait. I'm already having withdrawal. I've gone cold turkey and I can't handle it. But as ever, guys, thank you so much for watching. I've been Sean. This has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.